Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing a review on the Icemark Chronicles by Stuart Hill. This is one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, as you might know by now, and I finally finished the third book. I read the entire trilogy in the last month along with studying for the bar, so I'm not unhappy. Anyway, let's get into the review. The main plot of these books is that Princess Thurin, who is the redhead on this cover, well, the only person on this cover, is a princess, clearly, who has to fight back the Hypolitan Empire. Hypolitan Empire is an empire that has never been defeated, namely because its General Balorum, is just insane, for lack of a better word. He is incredibly brilliant and strategic, and the purpose of the Hypolitan Empire is to destroy anything that cannot be scientifically proven. They don't believe in magnets because those can't be scientifically quantified and qualified. And Thurin and her little kingdom defies everything that they know. They're backward and just not what the Hypolitan Empire likes. And besides that, they've got a lot of natural resources, so the Hypolitans decided they're going to invade the Icemark, and they expect it to be a very simple, fast, over and done with campaign. What they don't realize is that Thurin and her friends and allies are made of tougher stock. That is what happens in this book, and then the second book they're fighting the Hypolitan Empire again, and the third book they are helping the Hypolitan Empire while fighting off another enemy. I can't say more than that because serious spoilers. But, so for the first book, I love this book. It used to be my sister's, and then I read it so much more than she did that she gave it to me, which is the reason that the spine is very, very damaged. But this book just has so many great lines. There is a bit of a romance, but they start out as friends at the beginning, and by the end of the book, you can kind of tell that they like each other, and everybody else knows it, but they don't admit it to themselves, which is really fun. I love the characters in this. There are werewolves and vampires, and the vampires are just snarky as all get out because they've been alive for thousands of years, and they just don't care about these puny mortals who die in the blink of an eye. It's great. There are also witches and Oskin the Warlock, and there are giant snow leopards, which are some of my favorite characters in all three books because just imagining this snow leopard the size of a horse, talking like we do, and playing around like kittens is the funniest, most refined image I can think of. Also, the descriptions in these books are really great. Atmospheric without being overly descriptive, if that makes sense. My other favorite thing about these books is that they're mostly set in the winter, or at least this one primarily is, because they're preparing for the war, and you can't fight a war in a kingdom that is blocked and covered by snow and ice for 7 months. If you try, it's like invading Russia. Nobody has managed that, except maybe the Mongols, but they kind of live closer. They knew what they were doing. But at any rate, it's just really entertaining to watch and feel the cold. And then there's just some really humorous parts in here. For example, when Thurin's father is about to go into battle, he's about to go into battle with this really old, stern-looking warrior woman, and she's sitting there and they both realize that they're probably gonna die. And she says, "Alright, you know what, Your Majesty? If we're both gonna die, I'd like you to do one thing for me." And he says, "What is it?" And she said, "Kiss me." And he kind of looks a little bit shocked, but the housecarls are really motivated by this because it's their king who they love and this really stern, fierce warrior woman, and it's like, yeah, let's go get the Hypolitan Empire for them. And I really enjoy things like that as well. At this point, if you don't want to know anything about the rest of the series, now would be a good point to stop watching because I am going to go into spoilers for the sake of it being a trilogy, and there are things that I love that I have to say, but I don't want you to be spoiled. And then in the second book, which is Blade of Fire, again, we are fighting the Hypolitan Empire. The vampires develop significantly more in this book, which is incredibly fun to watch. In the first book, like I said, they're just really snarky and superior and haughty because they've been alive for 1,000 years, and they don't need to worry about those puny mortals. But then once you get to this book, you start to see them develop compassion and a sense of respect for Thurin and Oscan. This book is set 20 years after the events of the Cry of the Icemark, and it's really amazing to watch how everything's developed. Like I said, 20 years after, so Thurin and Oscan are married, and they have 5 kids, I think. Cressida, Medea, Charlemagne, Aedred, and Cerdic. Yeah, 5 kids. And Aedred and Cerdic are twins. Also, just twins. I love twins in stories. Fred and George, anybody? So it's really fun to watch that. They all have very distinct personalities, and to compare them to each other is really fun. This story mostly follows Charlemagne, who is the youngest of the family. He is, I think, 12 or 13 in this story, and when he was young, he got polio, and so he has a weak leg. He limps. That means that his family doesn't want him out on the battlefield. They don't see him as a warrior, which really gets Charlie down because he desperately wants to be a warrior. He knows the stories of his mother, Queen Thurin, as this amazing warrior who defeated the Polypontian Empire in the first book, and his sister and his brothers all get to go out with the housecarls and throw axes and ride horses. Medea is magical like her father Oscan, so she sits up in her tower and broods. But Charlie is not magical, and he is coddled to the point that he feels useless. Like I said, 20 years after, so Thurin and Oscan are married, and they have 5 kids, I think. Cressida, Medea, Charlemagne, Aedred, and Cerdic. Yeah, 5 kids. And Aedred and Cerdic are twins. Also, just twins. I love twins in stories. Fred and George, anybody? So it's really fun to watch that. They all have very distinct personalities, and to compare them to each other is really fun. This story mostly follows Charlemagne, who is the youngest of the family. He is, I think, 12 or 13 in this story, and when he was young, he got polio, and so he has a weak leg. He limps. That means that his family doesn't want him out on the battlefield. They don't see him as a warrior, which really gets Charlie down because he desperately wants to be a warrior. He knows the stories of his mother, Queen Thurin, as this amazing warrior who defeated the Polypontian Empire in the first book, and his sister and his brothers all get to go out with the housecarls and throw axes and ride horses. Medea is magical like her father Oscan, so she sits up in her tower and broods. But Charlie is not magical, and he is coddled to the point that he feels useless. The Polypontian Empire invades again in this book. Thurin sends away all of the non-combatants that she possibly can to the fantastical equivalent of Africa in this book, and she sends Charlie with them, naming him regent so that the Icemark can survive even if she doesn't. She and Cressida and the rest of them stay back and they fight, and obviously they do pretty well. But mostly I just love watching Charlie. He goes to this completely different culture. His culture in the north is very cold, and they do have religion, but they worship a goddess, and they believe in witches and ghosts, and it just all seems very normal to him. It's a very green, lush country. Then he goes south. It's a very long sea journey, and when they get there, they go to the equivalent of Venice, which is called Venezia, and the Doge there says, I can't piss off the Polypontian Empire, so secretly, yes, go check out this desert kingdom that has an amazing army and get help. Officially, no, I can't help you at all. But at any rate, Charlie takes the secret instructions and goes to this desert kingdom and meets Mehmet, who is the prince of the kingdom. And somehow Charlie manages to convince Mehmet and Mehmet's father, the Sultan, that it's a good idea to help this kingdom several weeks of sailing away. They also managed to convince Queen Ketshaka, who is the queen of not a servant kingdom, but Mehmet's kingdom and Ketshaka's kingdom have fought many, many times over the years, and neither of them have won. And so it's kind of an uneasy truce between these two equal kingdoms. At any rate, they go and they talk her into it as well, and her personality is fantastic. She's supposed to be this like almost 7 feet tall, amazing, muscular woman, strong, and they ride zebras, which is just hysterical. When the scholar Magyar Totus sees the zebras, he thinks he's completely lost his mind and the heat has gotten to him, which Maggie Ortotis is just a hysterical character. He writes down all of the events of all 3 books because he wants them to be chronicled for history, and he's just this cute little old fat man who carries around a cute old fat smelly cat. Like I said, it's adorable. Anyway, he meets Mehmet, and lo and behold, Mehmet doesn't treat Charlie like a cripple. He helps him figure out how to be a warrior and ultimately save the kingdom. Charlie's kingdom, not Mehmet's. There are just so many great parts in this book. One of my favorites, though, is where any point, and there are several, is where Thurin just desperately needs to be human again, because she's such a strong, stoic queen that when her heart, Charlie, is sent away across the seas, she needs to be able to talk to somebody, and you see that very much so between her and Oscan. I loved that she could be both and that Oscan loved her for both. There's also this part where Charlie is convincing the Sultan, and nobody has argued with the Sultan in years. And suddenly this little 13-year-old boy from a different kingdom asking for help goes up and starts screaming at the Sultan that he's an idiot for not helping and why wouldn't you? And Charlie says, and yet your cities are dying and your trade routes are drying up and your people go hungry as you fight against the raids that go on year after year, decade after decade. And the Sultan screams, and what other option have we had, little Lord Knowledgeable? And it just goes on like that for several pages. It's the funniest thing to read because you just imagine this sort of rotund guy screaming at this little 13-year-old boy with a bad leg as they both go, no, I'm right, and then at the end the Sultan realizes he's right, or Charlie's right. There's also, like I said at the beginning, the vampires in this book. By the end of it, they've realized that Thurin is their friend. And the pet names the vampire king and queen have for each other are just hysterical. Putrescent, Light of Day, I think is one of them. Anything along those lines is hysterical. So I loved this book more than I remembered. And then there's the last book, which is The Last Battle of the Icemark. This book is within maybe a year of the second book. So the Polypontian Empire has been defeated, and this race of people with an unbelievably severe matriarchy called the Hypolitan burst out from where the Polypontian have kept them high in these mountains for several, I think centuries, decades at least. And these women, led by Aranor, are going to take over the Polypontian Empire, which is crumbling, and set themselves up as the rulers of this empire. And they're going to remake the entire world in their image, which means that men are expendable, literally expendable. You can just shoot them and nobody cares. And women rule everything. What Aranor doesn't know is that Cronus, who is Oscan's father, and basically the goddess is the equivalent of the monotheistic god, and Cronus is the devil. He's incredibly strong in the magic world, but the goddess defeated him the first time, and now he's saved up his strength for all these millennia, and since Medea has joined forces with him, he and Medea decide that they're going to use Aranor to get the Icemark army out of the Icemark and down to the Polypontian, and then they're going to invade the Icemark and take over the world. Obviously, it's a book, there has to be some sort of happy ending, so take a guess as to whether they succeed or not. But this book, again, shows the vampire development as well, specifically the vampire queens. It also talks about some of the harder subjects. For example, Thurin and Cressida, her daughter, are talking about the Polypontians because in this book they are going to help the Polypontian Empire because Aranor, the Hypolitan Basilia, is about to attack the Polypontian capital where the emperor sits. And despite the fact that Thurin really hates the Polypontian Empire, they killed several of her family members, and they've invaded her country twice, she decides that she's going to go help them. But she has a really hard time thinking that they're any different. She thinks of them as a whole as opposed to individuals. More specifically, she has a really hard time thinking that Balorum was a rather odd individual, and that it was him specifically who was invading her because she showed him up twice, as opposed to the Emperor actually wanting that. So she's talking to Cressida about this, and she's having a really hard time, And Thurin says, but they're all the same. Every Polypontian soldier is a fanatical killing machine who could invade us again if we save their empire now. They're evil, Cressida. As a race, they're evil. And mind you, Cressida is about 17 at this point. And Cressida says one of my favorite lines in the book, which is, "There's no such thing as an evil race, just evil circumstances that make people do evil things." I just think that is so true, but people forget it all the time because they want to forget it. They want to generalize, which hurts all of us, but that's a much more philosophical, probably political question that we're going to ignore for now. Like I said, the vampires develop quite a lot, and this shows how much it is. So Medea has gone completely to the dark side in this, and the vampire queen is just taunting and harassing Medea and Cronus throughout their plan. And at one point, the vampire queen walks in to where Cronus and Medea are sitting and plotting and trying to eliminate the vampire queen because she is just a pain in their necks. So the vampire queen has come in and she's basically put them in their place and made them realize they're maybe not as strong as they think they are, but through their own hubris, they still think that they're really strong and that they can defeat the vampire queen, even though they haven't, and it's been at least 2 months. But that's not the point. The point is, the vampire queen later goes back, and while she is absolutely terrified of Oscan Witchfather because he is probably the most powerful warlock in the world, she realizes that he has limits, and when she talks to Medea and Cronus, she realizes that the vampire queen herself has limits. She said, "But the vampire queen had to admit that though she wasn't shocked that the Witchfather's daughter had returned from exile in the darkness, she was deeply disturbed by the depths of depravity to which Medea had managed to sink. It was all well and good being evil, as long as one remained within the limits and parameters of the goddess-given universe. But Medea and the creatures she'd brought with her obviously wanted to change everything. Truly, to some people, nothing was sacred." And I just had to laugh because we see vampires as almost the epitome of evil, and in the first book, don't get me wrong, the vampires definitely were. They held up their agreement, but very reluctantly, and then we see their development, and so to see the vampire queen admit that there are levels of depravity that even she wouldn't touch is really fun. And then we see Oscan and Thurin's relationship develop a lot more, as opposed to Thurin needing all the comfort in the second book though. In this book we see Oscan needing a lot of the comfort. He's really struggling with where did he go wrong in raising their daughter, and should he go to the dark so he can protect his wife and his other children, or should he stay in the light and work for the goddess and possibly lose everything that he holds dear. As my review, I recognize that it's a little bit longer than my normal videos. I do apologize about this, but I have so much to say about the series. I love it so much, if you can't tell. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up down below, and if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button down below. As always, I will leave my Goodreads linked in the down bar. If you have read this series, let me know what you think of it. Always curious. Anyway, until my next video. Bye!